This is some examples of possible strategies that might be used in a repeated game, repeated prisoner's dilemma specifically, along with some examples just sort of getting used to them. We still are not in this lecture getting to a point of talking about Nash equilibrium or equilibria. That will be the next lecture. This is just what strategies might look like, and when we have two strategies playing against each other, how do we calculate the payoffs? Strategies in repeated games, just like with a sequential game, need to have a choice at every possible point in time throughout the game. So in particular, this is important for games that will be infinite in length. You will need to specify in a strategy what that player will do no matter what happens. I'll give you examples of that on the next slide. You need to cover anything that they could do. So you can't just say, I'm going to do this if the other person cooperates. You need to tell me what you're going to do if they cooperate and if they defect. Your first choice, always, you don't get to see what the other player has done. The first round of the prisoner's dilemma, you're going in, you're making the decision at the same time, so you do not get to see what that other player has done. So you need some starting position. After that, you will get to see what they have done in the last round or in any previous round up to that point, and that might be useful. It does not necessarily have to be used in a strategy, but you might think of a reasonable player would probably make use of that information. So some common strategies that we're going to look at as being possible ways in which these games might be played in repeated prisoner's dilemmas. So there's some obvious ones. Always cooperate, obvious. This player cooperates no matter what the other player does. They don't even look at the other player. It's a super easy thing. Again, think about putting this into a computer program. In fact, we have a podcast that talks about running these as a computer tournament when they were first created. So that's going to be the next set of slides, and that's something you should listen to. But always cooperate is just, I play cooperate, does not matter what the other person has done. You could always have always defect. Again, there's no sort of interesting interaction there. That's just, I always do this one thing. Tit for tat, we talked about in the last set of slides. This is a pretty common strategy, which is I start out trying to cooperate this player. Then they just look at what did the other player do the last round. But it only looks back one round. So if we're in the 10th round, the tit for tat choice is just based off of what the other person did in the 9th round. So it just copies what they did in the last round. You might sometimes see this called copycat, just tit for tat. Grim Trigger is another version of a strategy that starts off with cooperation, but then the tit for tat version of it is it's not tit for tat repeating. It's once the other player has defected even once, this player defects forever. So it's grim in that they're never going to cooperate again. It's a trigger. They're triggered by one defection of the other player. The difference between grim trigger and tit for tat is that somebody, if they're playing tit for tat and the other person defects once but then goes back to playing cooperate, the tit for tat player will defect once and then go back to playing cooperate. Whereas in Grim Trigger, once that defection has happened, even if the other player cooperates continuously from then on, the Grim Trigger player is playing defect. There's absolutely no forgiveness. There's no second chance. Once the other person has made one defection, this person will play defect until the end of however many rounds it is or infinitely. You can modify these. So Grim Trigger with one forgiveness is Grim Trigger, except for you'll allow one defection that you still keep cooperating. It's on the second defection that then you just shut down and defect forever. Maybe I don't know, just some sort of forgiveness once and then no second, you get the second chance, but no third chance rather. Like no third chances. If you screw up a second time, it's over. There's also X period punishments. So tit for tat is something like this, but not quite. So X period punishment, you think about X equals 1 as the most common one. One period punishment is I cooperate. When the other player plays defect, I then play defect for 1 period. Then I go back to cooperate. So this differs from tit for tat in that in this one, there's the 1 period punishment and then an automatic return to cooperate. Whereas in tit for tat, if the other person has continued to defect, I will continue defecting. In this one, the assumption is if they continue defecting, I still am always giving them a chance. So I'm always going one period of defect, return to cooperate, or it could be 2, 3, 4 periods of punishment. It's a little weird. Don't know how much we'll look at it, but it is another alternative version of a strategy. A useful way of showing these strategies is something called state diagrams. They're easier to see than to explain, so we'll look at them, but they're just like little logic tree or little logic diagrams that show you how players are going to play. So boxes show choices and then arrows show you what move into or out of a choice. So for example, a Grim Trigger. We can draw a diagram that represents Grim Trigger. So Grim Trigger starts off with cooperate. So you're in the cooperate box. There you are. You stay in that box. So the way that you interpret this is, I'm in the box, I keep doing that unless something happens that takes me out of the box. In Grim Trigger, the thing that pulls you out is if the other player plays defect. So the way that people represent this is something like this, and let's just define that. That is this player's move. And the dot means anything. So that dot there just means leaving Grim Trigger doesn't depend on what this player is doing. It depends on what the other player does. So this is other player's move. And it's defect. When the other player plays defect, we exit. So this is the complete state diagram for the Grim Trigger strategy. It is start cooperating, continue cooperating forever and ever and ever, unless the other player, so player 2, the other player plays defect. If that happens, it moves you into this box where you are playing defect. Note there's no exit out of this box. Grim Trigger is defect forever and ever and ever. It's over at that point in time. Okay. So let's look at another one. Tit for tat. Similarly, tit for tat starts cooperate. And the exit is when the other person defects. Okay. So let's put that here. But tit for tat copies what the other player does. So you start and cooperate. If they keep cooperating, you'll just stay there, right? You're not exiting, so you're just going to stay in there for as many rounds as they keep cooperating. If they defect, you start defecting, but you only defect as long as they're defecting. So we need an exit out of this defect box. So what we'll do is we'll do this. Whoops, wrong thing. Cooperate. If they cooperate, you will move back through, right? So like now we have an exit from this defect box. When they defect, we move over here. Then if they continue defect, if they cooperate again, we'll move back to cooperating. And then we can just cycle around, but we'll stay in any box as long as people continue that action. Here's another example. This is the Grim Trigger with one forgiveness built in. So it's going to look a lot like the Grim Trigger. There's not going to be an exit from the sort of defect, right? It's still grim. Once you enter that, you're gone. But there is the one forgiveness. So the way we'll do this is start cooperating. And then you have to think, well, what gets me to stop cooperating? It's not when the person plays defect once, because once I forgive them. It's when they play it twice. This, you might not be able to obviously come up with a way of modeling this, but the nice way of doing this is just do the following. You can have multiple cooperate boxes in a row. So when the other person defects once, I move over to this box, which is still cooperate. But from that one, if they defect again, I move into this box, which is defect. So, you could sort of have somebody sitting here. This is the post one forgiveness box. Like that's I've given my one chance. You don't get to screw up again type version of this, right? And so that would be the Grim Trigger with one forgiveness. There's no exit out of this. Whoops, wrong color. There's no exit out of this because it's Grim. There's no way to get me back to cooperating once I have been sort of triggered here.